Hello and welcome everybody, I'm Barbarian. This is Crusader Kings III's 21st Dev Diary. Today we're going to talk about custom faiths and Pagan Reformation, a topic that directly expands on the last Dev Diary. So if you haven't read that one or watched the video that I made on it, then you should do so now, because everything that we're going to talk about here is definitely related to that, seeing as doctrines, tenets, and what a religion is made up of is very vital to this one. So today, again, we're going to talk about custom faiths and Pagan Reformation, which is something that kind of is, interestingly enough, building up on the Holy Fury expansions on the system in 2018. Holy Fury was November 2018, and I'm thinking, in my head, I'm just wondering, how much did CK3 actually inspire CK2's systems there, or how much did CK2 system inspire CK3 system? Because what we do know is that CK3 has been in development for about, I think, 5 years now. Maybe it was only 4, I can't remember, but I believe the developers talked about 5 years roughly. So with that being said, whoever inspired whom doesn't really matter. What matters is what we get now. What we get is a huge change to how everything works. I want to point out before we dive into this how it works in CK2. In CK2, you have a set, parent religion, and that parent religion is the strongest religion of its kind. And whenever there is a heresy, those heresies are predefined, meaning all of them already exist to a certain degree. Whether they, are practiced by anyone or not is something entirely different, but they can pop up over time, and you can convert to them. Now, the issue with that is, and this is the most important part to me personally when it comes to this Dev Diary, to point this out, the issue with converting to a heresy in CK2 is that unless you make that heresy the new parent religion, by making it the dominant part of that religious group, you will be in a situation where you are gimped, because you will have no holy orders, you most of the time won't have any religious heads, and most of the time you also will be in a situation where you simply cannot call crusades, and that is actually all of the time, where you can't do anything with holy wars and so on and so forth. Meaning, if you go for a heresy, you will have a gimped religious experience unless you actually go on and push it onto all of Europe. That is for Catholicism. Obviously, if it's Sunni, then you have to do it for all of the Middle East and Northern Africa. But you know what I'm saying, right? So the idea is that in CK2, if you go the path of a heresy, you will never see the full potential of that heresy unless you make it the parent religion. This is something that is addressed here in this Dev Diary, and I am incredibly excited about this, because this will be, and I know this is a very high promise, but believe me, we're going to jump into this in a second here. I think that this system will be the most flexible and most realistic faith simulation system that we have ever seen in any game. Not just by Paradox, but in any game, period. So let's jump into this, and let's start by talking about faith creation. So if you are a very pious ruler, if you have a lot of piety to spend, then you can convince your clergy of your local realm that, hey, you know what, something about the faith that we're currently following isn't right, I want to change a certain aspect. And we can take a look at the screen here, because this is essentially a screen that reminds me a lot of the Pagan Reformation screen in Holy Fury, which is again why I pointed out, I wonder who inspired whom. And the way this works is, I assume that you can choose your symbol here, you have a name for your new religion, whatever you want to give it, and then you have the main tenets, as talked about in the last episode of these Dev Diary videos, and you can see that they changed it here to ritual cannibalism. I'm not sure exactly which one this is. I kind of assume that this might be a faith coming from Orthodoxy, primarily because it has the pentarchy as a tenet, of course, which is something that Orthodoxy has and not Catholicism. But they changed a lot about this faith, and you can see the changes done right here, as well as the consequences. And here you can see the tenets and the doctrines that you can change, before you actually reform the faith. So you can look at this entire screen before you are able to reform anything, before you have the piety to do it. Very, very similar, yet again, to the CK2 unreformed Pagan Reformation screen. You can see that your faith, if you reform it, or rather if you create this heresy, it starts with a fervor 100. Now, in the last episode, I already talked about how I believe that fervor is probably essentially a system detailing, how willing and how much ability your people have to spread the faith and to convert others to it. So, for example, participating in crusades, winning holy wars, that sort of stuff. How able are they? How willing are they? And since this is a new heresy, everybody's excited, everybody's a bit, maybe even hysterical, so they go on and are incredibly zealous, and with that zeal, there is, of course, 100 fervor. Then the old faith tolerance, obviously because we have become cannibals, your old faith will consider you hostile, because you are a hostile entity that is threatening the piece of that old faith. Let's say it's Orthodoxy. Even if it isn't, it really doesn't matter. This may be a changed tenet from, the papal leader, from the hierocratic leadership of the Catholic Church to a pentarchy, but it really doesn't matter. Now, then down here, theocracy, abolish church holdings. You will gain direct control over your churches and they will count towards your domain limit, meaning that doing this with a faith, changing your faith, creating a new faith can absolutely ridiculously alter the way of playstyle that you know, kind of exhibit the way of playstyle that is allowed. This is very reminiscent of how Muslims work right now with the Iqta government, where you can hold mosques at your convenience, you know, if you want to hold those, and those also give you piety. Meaning this can be changed now, you can introduce this to your new faith. And then down here, the head of faith institutes a temporal head of faith, meaning that, you know, as we have it with Pagan Reformations, that a secular ruler also has the top of the church in control. The head of faith title will not be created, however, because it can be created later once you have two holy sites. I assume this means that when we are reforming this faith, when we are creating this faith, rather, I should say, it's not reformation actually, it's just creating a new Christian faith. When we're creating this, we are not holding two of the holy sites that are vital, and with that, we cannot name ourselves the temporal leader yet. You can see down here, I think this is the cannibalism symbol, so that is a virtue, that's quite nice. And then down here, I think this is like maybe a drinker, maybe just being what's it called? I can't even remember. Going out for you know, parties in CK2. You know the trait. We all know it. I just forgot about it. Being a carouser. And that is now a sin, while cannibalism is allowed. I assume this is cannibalism anyway. And then you can see, last but not least, that of course we are lacking 7,358 piety to actually create this faith. Now, the way faith creation works in CK3 is that you get an ungimped version, because you don't need to overtake any sort of parent faith, you just are a new faith. And you can completely determine what that ungimped version is, meaning no longer do you have to, hey, you know what, oh, I gotta wait until I get Lollard, for example, and I don't want to be Valdensian, I want to be this or that. Meaning you can actually go ahead and do whatever you really want to do with your own faith creation. Now, creating this, as you can see, I mean, 8,450 piety is a lot, but to be fair, you are introducing ritual cannibalism, meaning it is probably fair that not all people do agree with this new faith, and so it will cost you more to convince them. But you can create this faith, and then you are immediately an ungimped and natural version, akin to a parent religion in CK2, except the concept of a parent religion, I think, is no longer really valid. I think that has been fully, you know, the hierarchy in CK2 goes, you have one parent faith and then all of the heresies, and all of the heresies have limited gameplay abilities, and once they take over the parent faith, they are the new parent faith and everybody else is gimped. So this is no longer established as a hierarchy in CK3. Instead, you simply have this faith tolerance with the hostile faiths, of course, being, you know, heresies directly related to that parent religion in CK2. This is quite nice because it makes it so that if you have the piety, if you have a character that can, you know, establish a new religion, then you don't need to take over all of Europe to establish it as the full religion of Europe. You can just go on and accept it the way it is. This is a huge step towards making faith way more flexible and making it so that, for example, and I know that this is historically after the fact, after Crusader Kings time span, but you could, for example, go on and form the Anglican Church. Yes, you could. It's not that, you know, big a deal. Obviously, ritual cannibalism costs you much more piety than simply saying we don't listen to the Pope anymore, right? So this is now an option without having to take over all of Europe, so that your Anglican Church is no longer gimped. You can create the church and just keep it regional inside of, well, the British Isles, obviously. So this is a really nice change because it makes everything more flexible. It gets rid of this nonsense parent and child religion kind of thing going on in CK2 that makes it very hard to enjoy playing a heresy unless it actually takes over. And I think this is a huge step for the better. Now, as I pointed out earlier, it costs a lot to change your faith from something that, you know, was the status quo to something that is the diametrical opposite of the status quo. For example, eating humans and not eating humans. This means that the further you want to change a faith away from its original, the further you will have to go with a piety cost. You can see that right here. If you want to change religion, you will have to spend more the weirder you want to get. Unrestricted marriage, I assume, also is something like, you know, father-daughter, mother-son, that sort of stuff. So those marriages are essentially something that if you want to go through with it, you have to pay a considerably higher amount of piety. Going to the close kin taboo, for example, is, what is this, like 1/5 of the cost of the unrestricted marriage, somewhere around there. And I think this makes a lot of sense as well. If you, for example, were to pick up a heresy that already exists, this is, you know, a predefined heresy, and you develop your spin-off faith from that heresy that is closer to the heresy but further away from Catholicism, you would have to pay less. It makes a lot of sense, right? The more accepted something already is anyway in the faith that you're practicing, the less weird it will seem when you dynamically move it away from that. Now, what is important to point out here is that if you are creating a new faith, there are certain tenets that are locked behind being part of a religious, of one certain religion. For example, you will never be able to pick up Dharma as a religion that is in the Abrahamic faith. If you want to start in the Abrahamic faith and you want to develop there, obviously nobody has ever heard of the concept of Dharma. It makes no sense because we're talking about a strict afterlife. Meaning you cannot, convert away from, let's say, Catholicism into Hinduism or a sub-branch of Hinduism. It is impossible. What you can do, and we'll get to that in a second, because once we scroll down, we will see it. You can move on to have some syncretism going on. All of that is fine, but you can't convert from one religious group to another religious group. Obviously, that makes a lot of sense. But what is really important here to me is that if you, and you need to be aware of this, if you play CK3 and you want to create a heresy that fits whatever you want to do, make sure that you start with that heresy in the mother religion that already is close. Because otherwise you will lock yourself out of certain tenets of certain religions and so on and so forth, which will make it very frustrating for you. So definitely make sure that you are in the right religious group there. Now that being said, let's go down here, because obviously the total amount of piety your character needs in order to create the new faith will rise depending on how different the faith is. This cost can get quite high, meaning that creating a new faith or reforming a pagan one ends up being a lifelong goal for most characters. It is highly recommended to attempt this with characters who have a learning education and or who have multiple virtuous personality traits. It's important and I'm sure that, if I, for example, utilize the Crusades and then create my own religion, I should be in a position where I can do that even without having virtues or being high of learning. I mean, Henry VIII didn't have any of those things, but, I think it's a gameplay limiter, of course, it's a mechanic limiter, because we need to make it so that not everyone can all the time just create a heresy. Only certain characters can do it, otherwise we would just have heresy galore. Let's hope that that doesn't happen. But all in all, of course, you need certain requirements to convince the clergy and the people of your realm that it is good, that you are moving away to a better faith. Finally, timing your divine revelation to completely coincidentally occur when your faith is suffering from low fervor will make it much easier to get everyone to buy into your new canon. Now this, of course, fervor, they say they will talk about it later on in a Heresy Outbreaks dev diary. Fervor, I think we actually have it nailed down. I think fervor describes the ability of your people and your faith to convert others, to wage war against others, and to spread the message of your one true faith. So essentially, it's a better and more dynamic version of moral authority. Moral authority is a wild kind of denominator, or a wild number in CK2 that can really change within a month from 100 to 0. I think fervor should be a bit more fluid, but also a bit more logical in how it changes. Either way, I think this is a very promising change. And I do want to point out as well, by the way, I think I skipped over this, sadly. Here we go. Realm adoption, my close family will convert and 5 out of 47 vassals will convert, meaning the more influence you have, of course, the more vassals will convert and your close family will go with you because they trust you. And with that being said, we are now moving on to Pagan Reformations. I find it really cool what we have here for the religion creation. I think it takes the lessons learned from Holy Fury. It changes everything. The hierarchy of religions now make it so that heresies that are created, heresies that already exist, are no longer gimped. They are their own kind of life, and they don't have to take over the parent faith to actually become a meaningful addition to gameplay. So this is pretty cool, this is very well done. Again, in my opinion, the most flexible version of any religious simulator that we have ever had in any game that I have played, at the very least. I mean, there might be a hidden gem out there that I haven't played, but I highly doubt it. Now, with that being said, let's move on to Pagan Reformation, a topic that is a bit more familiar, I think, because we have already had that. We have already had the idea of, choosing a nature, a leadership system, and the doctrines in CK2. And this is, of course, not entirely different in CK3, it is just enhanced. So, if you start as a pagan, you will start with a special unreformed doctrine. That doctrine locks you into tribal government type. Of course, it makes sense, because, being a Romuvan, for example, or being a Germanic pagan, a religion is more than just something that you do in God's house. You do it as a way of life. The way you have lived for ages is the way that your ancestors and that your gods wanted your family and you yourself to live. Meaning, you won't be leaving your tribe anytime soon, because the tribe is the most important part of your life and is inherent in the essence of your religion. So if you want to change that, if you want to become a bit more civilized, if you want to become a bit more organized, you also have to organize your faith and make it clear that, that is okay to do. So, if you want to get rid of being a tribal realm, you either have to reform a faith or you have to convert to, for example, Catholicism, Islam, or Orthodoxy. I mean, those are the most religions that are being applied in the time frame of CK. You have the northern people, the Romuvans, the Slavs, and then also the Tengri people slowly but surely reforming to any of those named faiths. Although, of course, I think this would also be possible to just become Hindu, for example. With that being said, how does this work? This works very similar to faith creation. Rulers must earn a substantial amount of piety to organize their faith's disparate shamans into a coherent clergy. In addition, they must have at least 3 of their faith's holy sites located within their realm. You saw it earlier, we were able to create a temporal heresy without having any of the holy sites. It just made it so that we wouldn't be the temporal leader right away. We would have to hold the holy sites before we could actually claim that leadership. Now with the faith here, since we are unreformed, we actually have to hold the holy sites to make it clear, hey, we are the one true authority on the topic of, in this case, it says Vidilism. I assume Vidilism is maybe a different word for Romuva. I actually googled it and I literally found nothing on it, but I assume that that is exactly what it is. You know, I guess I'm just not educated enough on Baltic paganism. I'm very much not educated at all on it, so here we are. And you can see the holy site in Hiuma. When controlled by Vidilism, the following effects apply. All Vidilists, stewardship goes up and prowess also goes up. And if you hold these 3 holy sites that you can see right here, then you will be in a position to actually reform the pagan faith. Reformed faiths can gain a bonus to conversion against unreformed faiths, meaning if you reform your country, the people that are your vassals will be much easier to convert than if it was, for example, a heresy, because obviously, you know, it is easier to cling on to Catholicism than it is to cling on to an unreformed version of your reformed faith. A much easier time convincing them to go along with a reformation than a heresiarch within an existing faith would have with making a new heresy. Now here should be a photo, an image. I have that actually open, so let's take a look at it. This is the Vidilist Reformation. At long last, I've managed to gather every important Vaidile, and that's probably not how I pronounce it, in the world together so that they can discuss our beliefs and establish an official doctrine to guide our faith into the future. These Vidilist Vaidilius are encouraging cooperation and tolerance even towards non-believers, and many ancient superstitions and mythical stories have been canonized in the official doctrine. I have chosen to personally lead this burgeoning Vidilist movement and have assumed the title of Grieve, an exalted position that I will pass down to my descendants. The world will see that Divas favors us. Look at this fellow. This is, by the way, I really love how he looks. He looks like a real king, like a real human being. Now, that being said, this is essentially the Reformation. What we're looking at here is a temporal faith, a temporal Reformation with a very tolerant faith, meaning that, you know, for example, I assume there's some syncretism going on there, there is an organized church going on there, and all of this will now have an impact because all of the Vidalist rulers are more likely now to reform to that faith as well. And what we have down here, and this really finishes it off because this essentially was the Pagan Reformation mechanic, very similar to CK2, but still advanced, still enhanced, and a bit changed. But here we have some of the tenets and doctrines that we can push for. So let's take a look at these, shall we? Warmonger, very similar to the, I believe, one of the natures in CK2's Reformation mechanics. At peace opinion instead of offensive war opinion. Rulers have a conquest CB against neighboring rulers. Prestigious rulers can use an invasion CB once per lifetime. If one exists, the head of faith can declare great holy wars, provided this faith is organized. Members of the clergy can serve as commanders or champions. So there you go, this is a very classic, quite vanilla thing, I think. Then fundamentalists, adherents of other faiths will have opinion penalties of 200%. County conversion speed plus 20%. Counties of other faiths are more likely to join factions. Increased danger from heresies when at low fervor. And can revoke landed titles from hostile and evil infidels without incurring tyranny. So as you can see, this is something, you know, very similar, I think, to the proselytizing nature of CK2's Reformation thing. Human sacrifice. Executions earn piety instead of costing piety. Grants the raid for captors CB against neighboring realms. Very nice. Very excited for that one. That is a tanky Reformation in the waiting if I've ever seen one. Ritual cannibalism. The cannibal trait is no longer considered criminal. Makes cannibal a virtue. Adherent opinion plus 20 and piety plus 2 per month. This is what we saw earlier. This was one of the main doctrines that we were looking at, and this is just excellent. You need this if you want to have one of the most outlier faiths out there. And then the peace doctrines include, but not, obviously it's not exclusive, but they include dharmic pacifism, which is, I think, something that you can only pick if you are already part of the Orientalist group. And there you go, counter conversion resistance plus 20%, cannot declare holy wars or raid, opinions of other pacifists plus 10, makes calm a virtue and makes wrathful a sin, wrathful. Pluralist. Adherents of other faiths will have an opinion penalties of 50%, so it's lower. County conversion speed minus 20%. Counties of other faiths are less likely to join factions, so essentially the very opposite of fundamentalist. And then Christian syncretism. Very cool in my opinion. Considers Christian faiths and is considered by Christian faiths to be hostile instead of evil. Mutual opinion bonus with Christian faiths. Makes compassionate a virtue and makes the following traits: sins, callous, and sadistic. This is very nice. I really hope, because in CK2 it really wasn't an option. I hope that in CK2 we are in a situation where we can actually play a peaceful and a syncretic faith without just constantly being overthrown with rebellions because everybody gets mad that everyone is of a different religion. And then down here, question mark, exclamation mark, carnal exaltation. The pleasures of the flesh are sublime in a way that transcends other earthly experiences, bringing us closer to the divine. We should glorify our sexual desires and seek out opportunities for us to fulfill them. As you can see, lustful is a virtue and chaste is a sin. You know, maybe that is one of the easier new tenets to introduce into a Christian heresy. Divine marriage. Adherents who are married to a close family member have +10 opinion from vassals of the same faith. Marrying a close family member for the first time grants a large amount of piety. Classic. Absolute classic. And then Kudikis Lemti, I assume this is a Vidilist specific tenet that you can choose. Mothers are less likely to die in childbirth and children are less likely to be sickly or stillborn. The bathhouses where mothers give birth must be cleansed and prepared with the proper rituals in order to encourage the divine to grant us their blessing during childbirth, meaning you have special preparations so that your fertility and that your life continues on. Although what I'm seeing here, actually, you know what, all Vidalists, maybe everyone, if you choose this tenet, everyone of your religion gets this bonus, but if you choose this tenet and are Vidalist, maybe this also comes into effect. I'm not actually quite sure how exactly this works, but I would, for starters, just assume that this is essentially exclusive to the Vidalist faith. And with that being said, we are actually at the end of it. My personal too long didn't watch pretty much is, hey, this is the most advanced religious simulator that we have ever seen. It is the most flexible when it comes to reforming and when it comes to becoming a heresy. And I think this is huge. It will finally make it so that playing a heresy is no longer punishment until you become the parent religion, and it will make it so that it becomes very attractive, maybe to reform a faith very slowly, you know, piece by piece. You just change it every now and again, because you don't obviously have characters that are amazing at, you know, piety gain, and will have to struggle for it. But I think this is very, very cool. Honestly, exactly what I was hoping for CK3. It's amazing. I can't wait until this game comes out. I actually cannot wait until then. But next Dev Diary will be about something else. It will be Heptopus talking about the diversity across the world in CK3 and the many different ways you can tailor the game experience to match your personal preferences. Very excited for that one as well, because what we're looking at there is essentially, you know, what different playstyles are suited for CK3. Hopefully, all of them. Now, that being said, I want to thank the members of the channel, namely the Barons, Aaron, Stefan, the Richest T, Snowwolf, Emma, Mello, Thomas, Lachlan, and Mitchell, and of course also the Counts, Shifty, and Wombat, and last but not least, the absolutely beautiful Dukes, Suspicious Duck, Nathan, Knight Squires, Kenneth, Lexo, Roboman, and Eric and Aiden. Thank you so much, and I will see all of you the next week. Later, Alligator.